of the Serbian government. When war began in Kosovo, or hostilities, better speaking, began, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you. He has a degree in economics.
Language and nation.
As Wednesday, the 12th of June, I would ask the speaker and organize peaceful, nonviolent protests there for the release.
Therefore, their unit of their viewpoint is the relation between the units. So they do not mind much how the situation is in Serbia or in Kosovo or in Bosnia or in Macedonia, but it is these units that should be in good relations with each other. So it is this viewpoint from outside and from above which is conditioning the situation on the ground. That's why they want normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, while I advocate for normalization of Kosovo as a state, normalization of Serbia as a state, and afterwards to have normal relations as a normal consequence of normalization of these two countries. And today I must say that we didn't get normalization between Kosovo and Serbia. However, we got some aside normalizations, which are not just, but very important. Normalization of relations between Thaci and Dacic, between prime ministers, normalization of relations between Serbia and EU, and normalization of relation between Kosovar government and Serbian parallel and illegal structures in Kosovo. I shall point now at two asymmetries during the negotiations. The first asymmetry is that EU is both mediating between Kosovo and Serbia, but at the same time ruling over Kosovo with executive powers which it has, and which, according to Article 3H of Joint Action Plan of 4th of February 2008, which is the foundation of, legal foundation of EULEX, these executive powers are not limited neither in scope nor in time. So EU is in this situation both a mediator between two sides and a ruler of one of the sides. The first consequence and most important of this asymmetry is that we end up by unilateral implementation of all the concessions which were done to Serbia because we are under international protectorate under the rule of EU. So Serbia can always postpone agreements, postpone implementation of agreements and agreements about implementation of agreements, because she can always count that EU is going to pressure Kosovo to unilaterally implement those concessions. This was also the case with Ahtisaari's plan. Serbia wanted ethnically based decentralization, exterritoriality of Orthodox churches, and so on and so forth, but they didn't accept the entire package because they knew that the international community is going to force us to implement all those concessions. Second asymmetry is that topics of this dialogue are only internal issues of Kosovo. Serbia demands more rights for Serbs in Kosovo, but this is an expression of her hegemony because she is not ready to turn this demand into a principle. We know that we have Vojvodina, we have Sanjak, we have Valley of Preševa, and generally there are more Albanians in Serbia than Serbs in Kosovo. Of course, we want to have as high as possible minority rights all over the region, but this asymmetry, this lack of reciprocity, will create more tensions than solutions. Lately now, we got this association of Serb majority municipalities, which means that Ahtisaari's municipalities south from River Iber are joining the north rather than the other way around. So while Serbia is getting closer to EU, north is getting closer to Serbia, and Gračanica, Parteš, Klokot, and other municipalities are getting closer to the north under this frame of association of Serb majority municipalities. And it is very likely that the relation between this association and the government of Kosovo will be the one of Republika Srpska and Bosnia in Bosnia. For example, tonight, President Yahyaga can dismantle the parliament and call for early elections. She has that right. Tonight, Prime Minister thought he can dismantle the government by giving his resignation. But none of them can dismantle this association, whose enlargement is left up to the association itself, and likewise the dismantling of this association on some occasion in the future. I believe that it is very wrong that we had dialogue with Serbia without conditions for Serbia, because what we need to change in the region is Serbia. We don't need to change Kosovo, we need to change Serbia. Because it is Serbia which maintains its hegemonic aspirations by, in a way, being a sort of a small Russia in the Balkans with its satellites, Republika Srpska in Bosnia, 30% of the population in Montenegro who declare themselves Serbs because they were against independence of Montenegro and their political parties. North in Kosovo, and not only north, because power structures are elsewhere as well. And likewise, Macedonia now, which is a very interesting development, is entering into a kind of Belgrade protectorate. A few days ago, a government of Serbia and government of Macedonia established this joint meeting, which will be twice per year. And Dacic, a few months ago, came to Skopje in Macedonia, and he said to Gruevski, there is no danger for you from the north. If you have other problems, we are here to help you. At the same day, Foreign Minister of Macedonia, Popovski, was meeting Lavrov in Russia. So I think that there is a kind of geopolitical vicious circle in all this, and it is very problematic. And I fully understand EU, which wants to, let's say, weaken Russia in the Balkans, and I fully understand and support this. But I think it's not right if weakening of the Russia in the Balkans will have as a consequence strengthening of the Serbia in the Balkans, because then the price for this will be paid by the neighbors of Serbia, Albanians, Bosniaks, and Croats. We know that Germany has already put 7 conditions to Serbia. Our government of Kosovo, none. So paradoxically, government of Germany is way more advanced in principle when it comes to Belgrade's aspiration than our own government. There is one great intellectual, Albanian intellectual of the 20th century, Ukšin Hoti, who was a professor at Harvard for a while. He said, he's missing person today. He said that, that at the end of the day, Serbia can imagine independence of Kosovo and freedom of Albanians, but never cannot imagine equality with us. And again, Serbia now is in a way saying more or less, like some international officials, that will be recognizing Kosovo once it joins EU. Because precisely then we are again not going to be equal. Serbia will be member of EU and we will be left outside. Serbia could not imagine both Serbia and Kosovo be republics. Now cannot imagine both Kosovo and Serbia be independent countries. And that's why the only scapegoat is that once Serbia becomes member of EU to recognize us. But if Serbia enters to EU before Albania and before Kosovo, I think that Greece is doing nothing to Macedonia what Serbia will do to us. So I think that we should be very careful about the dynamics in the region toward EU integration, because some of the present inequalities get bigger through the process of integration. The last thing I wanted to say is that there is a strange mixture of corruption and organized crime and lack of development, huge unemployment and poverty in Kosovo, in one hand, with a dialogue Kosovo-Serbia on the other, because politicians in Kosovo, in order to be accepted by international community, despite their corruption, are being very submissive and obedient when it comes to dialogue with Serbia, and in this way they become acceptable for international community. And finally, EULEX gets in prison either Albanians from Kosovo Liberation Army for war crimes, and usually they're small or medium fishes, never for corruption. And while EU officials dine together with the big sharks who happen to be still in the government. Thank you.
What I mean by pre-conflict is that the war happened, and there is a big chance that it's going to happen again. So while thinking of building a post-conflict society, our role in the Balkans is to make sure that it never happens again. So while they come and speak to us as if we're really turning a new chapter, what the international community is afraid in Kosovo is that we don't turn over to the previous chapters and have conflict. That makes the international community having as its only and most important, maybe not only, but most important incentive, short-term stability. Short-term stability is key for the international community, not just in Kosovo, but when you see the EU foreign policy and the US foreign policy, you can see that it's driven by this concept of short-term stability. Short-term stability can come at the expense of democracy, can come at the expense of tolerating crime, can come at the expense of tolerating even corruption and all these kinds of events. When you look at the situation like in Bosnia, and we keep saying this all the time, you look at who the international community has supported, especially in Republika Srpska, considering that these people might be the moderates who are going to bring Bosnia forward by allowing them free hands in the economy, hence creating what we call oligarchs and rich people in governments that now it's too difficult to bring down because of the poverty, and they are the richest people in the country. When we look at the current dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, it has been hailed as one of the most important agreements in history. It has been hailed as historic. It is very interesting that every year in Kosovo almost we have a historic agreement. So now we don't, by historic I guess it means it's in the past. And that's how I understand it, because these historic agreements then are undone and basically are not implemented. So we have another historic agreement, which is very interesting as to why now, why so fast, and why was it being pushed at this very moment. There are several reasons, because for me it is very difficult to understand how all of a sudden these political leaders in Serbia, who have been only once in government together in the history of Serbia, and that is in the year 99 when Šešelj joined Milošević, are today rehabilitated politicians who are hailed as very important leaders in the region. I'm talking here about people like Prime Minister Dačić, who was part of the Milošević government, who was claiming that NATO is a terrorist organization. I'm talking about Deputy Prime Minister Vučić, who used to say in the Serb parliament, for every Serb killed, we're going to kill 100 Muslims. I'm talking about Nikolić, who actually does not recognize that 1 million Kosovars were driven out of Kosovo. And all of a sudden, these are the politicians that are supposed to bring democracy to Serbia, because for us it's also important that Serbia has changed, that Serbia is democratic, because they are our neighbors. We cannot change that. But we can make sure that we drive the change in Serbia that is necessary for stability and peace in the Balkans. They would come to our office and say, please, Kosovo has to talk to Dačić. Dačić is the Democrat. He's part of the Demokratska stranka. He is the guy who is going to accept that Kosovo is independent. You have to talk to him, because if Nikolić wins, that's the catastrophe. Now, the same people, and when I say same people, I don't mean the exact same persons, but representatives of these countries come to us and say, Nikolić is the chance, Vučić is the chance. And you know that that is driven by this incentive for short-term stability. If I go to a court with a Serb, the Serb side can request that the judge be Serb, just because I was born Albanian. For me, having lived, especially in the United States, for a couple of years, this is unacceptable, and I think it's discriminating, and it's actually quite disgraceful for the EU that they push such agreements, because if Kosovo would be a member of the Council of Europe, I think it would be a great case to bring this agreement down just on the basis of inequality and discrimination against a part of the country. Lëvizja Vetëvendosje believes that the Serb minority in Kosovo should and can only be integrated socio-economically. I think that the push for institutional integration did not work and will not work. We have 2 Serb ministers in the government, as if that makes the situation of the Serbs in Kosovo better. I can tell you it has not. It has made the life of the 2 Serbs ministers better because their houses have grown. But the life of the Serbs, as the lives of the Albanians, have not changed at all. We believe that the EU, instead of pushing for this normalization of the dialogue, should push for the normalization of Kosovo and Serbia. Normalization of Kosovo means that the priority should be economic development, social development of Kosovo, people working together in manufacturing, people working together in factories, people studying together in universities. When people would have a good standard of living and the rule of law would be obeyed, then that would be the best integration possible. We have a lot of Albanians living in Germany. They integrate not because they want to, but because they have to. And we believe that if we provide opportunities to everyone living in Kosovo, that would be the best integration possible. But that does not happen overnight. And that's the problem that we have with this agreement. We try to say situation in Mitrovica has not improved, so let's have an agreement by tomorrow. We believe that socio-economic development will take longer, and that's the only way how we can make the Kosovo state and society stronger.
It's great to be here today, really. This is, we have 2 well-known figures in Kosovo, leaders. Albin has a political party that is rapidly becoming very popular, and maybe in the next elections, Albin, you and Shpend will be in the position of having responsibility for governance, which is quite a different role than being in the opposition. And I think we're privileged to have them come today and share with us their perspectives. Of course, the opportunity we have here is perhaps to reflect and even challenge some of those perspectives, and so that we have an open discussion and an exchange of views. And what I would like to do is here, just reacting in some ways, so without prepared remarks, try to give a slightly, or perhaps quite significantly, different perspective. The first thing that I might say is, here we are in Washington, so why don't we back up for a second and consider what is the U.S. interest in Kosovo and in the region. We are still, it's clear today, struggling with the dissolution of former Yugoslavia. And as you know, right from the outset, the U.S. Interest in that dissolution was actually very marginal. And the U.S. role and commitment in the region from the beginning has been one of reluctance, from the first Bush administration going into the Clinton administration until well into it, until the intervention in Bosnia. And of course, Kosovo suffered from that because the issue of Kosovo, which was the initial problem and one of the biggest problems in former Yugoslavia, was put to the back of the line. And there was a long delay there. Now, fortunately, in former Yugoslavia, which we're still dealing with, unlike Syria, Iraq, so many other places around the world, there is a solution. There is a point of strategic orientation that does not exist for other deeply conflicted countries. And again, the best example is Syria, and that is the prospect of EU and NATO membership, NATO for those who want it. And many in the region do want that. And that's the significant difference. And that difference is, and I think correctly so, the foundation of U.S. of transatlantic policy. which is to utilize the shared interest in joining the European Union and NATO to drive reforms, including precisely the kinds of things you're talking about, including the internal reforms in Serbia, in Kosovo, in Bosnia, in Croatia, that are necessary not just for good relations between states, but good relations within those states. Because the fact of the matter is that in the Balkans, it's a highly mixed environment. And with some exceptions, Croatia most notably, there's not going to be massive population transfer. People are going to have to learn how to live with each other. That's the challenge. And again, the strategy is to try to utilize the attraction of the European Union and NATO to galvanize those reforms. And thank goodness, despite all the crisis in the European Union, that attraction is still there, because that was the primary factor that drove Belgrade and Pristina to this compromise. That's the first thing I'd like to say. The second thing is with respect to the particulars of the difficulties within Kosovo. I think it's important to have some respect for just how deep those are. They are the oldest, most intractable difficulties in the region. Unlike in Bosnia and in Croatia, the difficulties between Serbs and Albanians stretch back a full century, well before World War II, well before the Nazi invasion into the region. There are some really serious, very difficult issues that Serbs and Albanians have with each other. And I would say the other thing is, if you look at the record objectively and fairly, the treatment has been, of each side, has been abominable. When each side has had the upper hand and the advantage, they've treated the other in terrible fashion. And of course, our memory is deeply colored by the Milosevic years. But you know as well, there was the terrible hostility towards Serbs that was shown after the NATO air campaign was completed in the initial stages. And of course, the explosion in March 2004, which was absolutely disgraceful, one of the most disgraceful scenes of mass hostility towards an isolated minority population whose only crime was what their ethnicity was. So I think we have a very difficult situation that the international community, and I was part of the effort there, as Mike indicated, in these past couple of years, but in prior years as well, to struggle to deal with it. And of course, mistakes. There have been significant mistakes, most notably, again, as I say, protracting important decisions on Kosovo, including independence, which was foolishly and needlessly protracted whenever we knew there was no other solution but independence. But nevertheless, that is where we are. And in my opinion, the agreement of 19 April is a huge positive milestone, a huge significant development, positive in the history both of Kosovo and Serbia. And I think most of all what makes it significant and historic is, for the first time in this century of conflict, Serbs have acquiesced and acknowledged the full authority of Albanians over the entire territory of Kosovo. Now, there is still, I don't claim it's going to be smooth and easy, and I don't claim that the 19 April agreement is absolutely clear. It isn't. There is a potential, as you correctly point out, for a Bosnia-style difficulties there because of the overlapping constitutional role, and we have to see and be very careful about what this zajednica, or association of Serb municipalities, becomes, and everyone has to be quite on guard that it achieves its intended purpose to protect the rights of Serbs and not to destroy and to divide and protract the necessary reconciliation, for example, on issues like Trepča, which stand idle, no investment for that potential. Why? Simply because of the ongoing political conflict. And it was necessary to address it, and that became very apparent during my tenure in Kosovo in July-August of 2011, when Pristina sent special police into the north to try to establish border control, and were met with a violent resistance from Serbs. And that, as it turned out, that was the wake-up call that Brussels needed to understand that the situation in the north was absolutely unstable and untenable. And the efforts that we've seen since then, I think, have been quite appropriate. Belgrade, after that incident, and following other incidents, clashes with KFOR soldiers, including when Serbs shot and wounded German troops in KFOR, we saw increasing engagement of Berlin, and therefore Brussels. The famous meeting in Belgrade when Chancellor Merkel told then President Tadic to cut the support for parallel structures. And we saw a change in policy. We saw Brussels finally apply very strict conditionality to the Serbian application for candidacy. And it was that result, after the so-called technical talks, that produced the more serious political talks, and ultimately the compromise and the concessions. I think that very significant concessions from the Serb side on the 19th of April. Now that's all. The lesson there is it requires continuous scrutiny, continuous conditionality, and no one should relax and think that the problem is done and that the problem is solved. But I really, at this point, fail to see some kind of all of the dramatic language about how problematic and how difficult it will be. It will require close scrutiny to see that it's properly implemented, to avoid a Bosnia-style disaster or other parallels, for example, in Sarajevo, or after the Serbs fled Sarajevo, or in Knin. But that is, I think, still something that we to be encouraged about and to focus on. And then, secondly, if I could just turn to your political party, which, as I said before, Albin Shpend, which has made tremendous strides and which, to its credit, has shown some evolution. Your emphasis on fighting corruption is something that I think warms the hearts of any interested person in Washington, Brussels, or anywhere else. And you're to be congratulated for that and to putting that at the forefront of your party platform. Because it is rule of law, and it's not just relations between states, but rule of law is a primary concern of anyone who cares about progress in the region. On the other, and also, I would say, you're to be congratulated for the evolution in your views towards the Serb community in Kosovo, going from what I saw when I was there, these vigilante attacks on trucks that had Belgrade plates, and getting the driver out and dumping the contents, taking the law in your own hands, which is not rule of law, but is what we would call vigilantism. But going from that to a situation where this year your party has condemned Albanians who desecrated Orthodox cemeteries. And that is quite to your credit. And those are the kinds of things, Alden, that will really bring your party into not only legitimacy, but into respect of the international community. However, the last thing I would say, that what will bring your party into continued confrontation with the international community, including in Washington, is the consistent support for unification with Albania. And we don't need to say very much about it, except that I'm not aware of anyone anyone here in Washington that I've talked to who thinks that's a good idea. point to the contrary. People think it's a terrible idea. It's against your constitution. It's against the entire premise of Kosovo's independence, which was premised on the Ahtisaari Agreement, which is incorporated into your constitution. Your constitution states very clearly no unification. And I believe that this is a reckless and dangerous policy position that will have the opposite effect of the main issue that is before you, which is the situation in the north. If you challenge the premise for Kosovo's independence, you play into the hands of those who would challenge Kosovo's territorial integrity, and I think that is very much against the interest of the people of Kosovo, all the people of Kosovo. Thank you very much.
Right. Welcome, Shpend and Albin here. I count myself proudly among those who argued for visas for them for years now. And I'm pleased to see them here. However much I'm about to express reservations about some of what they have to say. First, I feel disadvantaged. I never took the writings of Carl Bildt or Robert Cooper seriously enough to actually consult them. You know, what you say is probably correct, that they're more concerned with relations than with the structure of the states, because after all, that's all of what the European Union is about as well. But what difference does that make? I mean, you know, the international community has made a serious commitment to see Kosovo develop as a state, and a state that can negotiate and enter the European Union. And that seems to me to be a very long-term commitment. I will admit happily that we're concerned with short-term stability in Kosovo, and there's no doubt about that. Nobody wants to see another March 2004. Nobody wants to see any more violence in the north. Nobody wants to see, you know, some of the incidents that have occurred over the years and in which Vetfendosia has participated. There is a priority to preventing short-term instability. But there's also a very long-term commitment here with a great deal of money, a great deal of effort behind it. And I don't know of any respect, any important respect, in which Kosovo can expect to be limited forever. You know, you have a constitution, you will eventually amend that constitution, people will step aside as you do it. I can't imagine what good it would do to amend the Constitution to remove the provision that says no union with another state or part of another state. I can guarantee you that in Washington, D.C., your support will evaporate instantaneously. There is no question, and I've said this in this room before, there is no question but that there was an implied bargain of the last 10 years, maybe more, and that bargain was, yes, Kosovo becomes independent, but it remains a separate state, and it does not join with Albania or with part of Macedonia. Why? Not because you shouldn't have the inherent right to do it. I mean, you should have the inherent right to do what you want, but because it would be destabilizing for the region as a whole and cause violence and create very serious problems. And I just don't see any way out of that. And you may choose someday when you're in power to exercise your rights, but I think you should be clear about attitudes in Washington. We will not be happy with it, we won't support it, and those of us who frankly fought very hard to be supportive of Kosovo over the last couple of decades will be exceedingly displeased, is the way I would put it. I also find myself in radical agreement with some of the things you say, and I want to note a few of those. First of all, the short-term stability point, you're right, we are concerned about that. Secondly, reciprocity. I agree. I think reciprocity should be on your minds every day of the week when dealing with the Serbs. And that when they ask for something in the north of Kosovo for the Serbian communities, they should be asked, why aren't you offering the same for Albanians in Serbia? I think it's your right, your responsibility to ask those questions. I don't think you'll get complete satisfaction on all of those points, but I don't see any reason why you shouldn't ask those questions and expect some really good answers. And, you know, it's just possible those questions haven't been as consistently asked as maybe they should have been. Though I hasten to add that the negotiation of this agreement, while very opaque in some senses, was really very transparent in others, especially on the Kosovo side, and especially once it was actually published. It's hard to be completely transparent while you're negotiating something, but I applaud the way in which the Kosovo government took the agreement back to Parliament immediately, explained it, got support for it, and I think that's important, and an important precedent that was set in Kosovo's governance. I agree with you when you say corruption is important, not because I know how important it is, I don't, because those things are very opaque to foreigners, but because I know that the citizens of Kosovo regard it as important, and because I know that the European community and the Americans regard it as important, and that it's a really important factor in how you are dealt with in the world. So I don't disagree about that at all, and that some politicians on both sides of this negotiation, Belgrade and Pristina, have looked to the agreement as a way of saving their images in front of the European Union and the United States. I have no doubt about that. Sure, that happens. That's part of the game. It would have been true whether there was corruption in Kosovo or not. But there is corruption, and if there's a single priority that I would put my finger on for the immediate future, and one in which an opposition movement like Vetëvendosja can play a very strong role, it is in not just in making accusations, but in really trying to get to the bottom of what goes on in Kosovo, and trying to encourage the judiciary, trying to make sure that no stone is left unturned in trying to clean things up as best you can. Belgrade, I hasten to add, faces exactly the same problems. The politicians who are now trying to clean things up in Belgrade are getting a great deal of credit for it. In fact, if Vučić has a strong position in Belgrade today, it's because of what he's done on corruption, not because of the past of Nikolić's party or Dačić's party. So I feel disadvantaged in criticizing you because I haven't read all the basic texts like Cooper and Bill. I feel somewhat in agreement with you on some important questions, and quite appalled on the question of whether Kosovo should remain an independent and sovereign state, which is what Washington's commitment and Brussels' commitment is.
Let me just pile on and remind you that even, all other things aside, Albania would have to agree to unification. Now, I can tell you, if Albania would be presented with a choice, my guess is that Washington would utilize its clout in NATO and just simply say, fine, but you know, you're not going to be a member of NATO anymore. And the EU would certainly say, that's fine, but your candidacy has just ended. It's been a long time since I studied Balkan history, but I do know that there are differences have grown up over the years, not the least of which that Albania was living under Enver Hoxha for all that time, and you folks, your ancestors, families were living in a different system. My guess is even if you somehow would get a majority in Kosovo to opt for unification, my guess is Albania wouldn't buy it. That's just, you know, if we're getting into futurology, that's my contribution. I had the same reaction as Ed Joseph when you were sort of indicating that the EU would be powerless to lean on Serbia. You know, saying it's asymmetrical. They're going to lean on you, but not lean on Serbia. Well, I'm not so sure about that. And I think the Merkel-Tadic discussions and results that Ed alluded to, I had that written down also, show that even if and you yourself said that Shpend, that even though the EU has not been notably successful as an international actor itself, some of the member states still carry on pretty active foreign policies, and this in a sense seems to prove the point. So I do think there will be pressure on Serbia to implement in the agreement. I don't know Nikolic and Vučić and Dačić personally, and it's very easy to be cynical about any politicians, and I mean that, any politicians. But Albin, you were basically talking about, or maybe it was Shpend, I can't remember, talking about, he said this way back when, and he said that, and you know, killing 100 Muslims and all that. That's interesting. I'm a historian. I think that's fair to cite that. But you know, people can change their policies, and people can change their policies for a variety of reasons. Maybe for pure expediency, but that's okay. That's the name of international politics. And I certainly do not exclude the possibility that these three gentlemen, for whatever reason, have changed their policies. They want to get in the EU, for example, or they just see that it's a dead end the way things were going, or they want to build democracy in Serbia. I don't know, whatever the reasons are, but I do think that it's a mistake just to cite really unfortunate comments in the past. Nobody quarrels with the way you judge them, but then just sort of assume that that means that these policies are written in stone and aren't going to change. I was with Carl Bildt and Robert Cooper 10 days ago at a security conference in Tallinn. They would be really flattered to know that you're quoting them. But the important point, I would say, is that sure, one international security conference does not equal the collective opinion of the international community, but it's one little sliver. And I have to tell you, I didn't hear anybody challenge the idea that the agreement was a positive step. And I think that when the Kosovo parliament debates this, I think you should keep this in mind. I mean, that's, you know, again, it is possible to think, if I put myself in your shoes, I don't think this agreement is good enough, but turning it down, given the feeling of the international community and the individual governments of the EU and the United States of America, I may have to swallow hard and accept the lesser of the two evils. That's, you know, politics is the art of the possible, or you choose your cliche. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And then finally, I should have mentioned this. I remember back in 1973, I guess it was, when Henry Kissinger had his negotiations in the the last Arab-Israeli war, and he had his tent set up at kilometer 107, and he had his, the Egyptian delegate was one of his former Harvard students, and the Israeli delegate was one of his former Harvard students. I can't resist telling you that Shpend was a classmate at the Kennedy School of Vuk Jeremic, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, first of all, I think that when it comes to this dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, EU is more important than US. I think that US is still important, but not like 3, 4, or 10 years ago. So there is this trend in Kosovo. However, US has a lot of informal role in Kosovo. If we had Mr. Peter Faith, who was like the official king of Kosovo, and later on Samuel Zbogar, we had also the unofficial king, was Mr. Del, and all of these were living in one hill in the suburb of Pristina, like Olimp was there. We had all the gods up there. So there, of course, there is huge influence altogether, but I think things are changing a bit in this respect, especially with dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, which is one of the top 5 priorities of EU foreign and security policy. Regarding protection of minorities, I must say that we think that the real integration of minorities is social integration. Institutional integration is necessary but not sufficient. We had Oliver Ivanovic integrated in Kosovo institutions for 8 years. We know where he is now. He's secretary in the so-called Ministry of Serbia for Kosovo. So I think that social integration comes along with economic development. It doesn't happen statically. It happens through a process of development. And when I say development, I mean manufacture production, where workers or good universities, where students would communicate and cooperate. They would all have what to win and what to lose. And in this way, integration would happen in activities, in a process, and not through representation. Social integration is integration from below. Institutional integration is integration from above. Yes, only one other thing that I wanted to say, that definitely one important thing is that corruption is not a culture. Corruption is a system. This is very important to notice. Of course, then after you have some patterns of behavior, corruptive behaviors, but however, the underlying structure of corruption is rather systemic than cultural, and this is very important to get rid of it.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with one thing that you just said. Yes, but obviously with regard to minorities, social integration is key, and certainly in the long run it is. But I have to say, the government and its laws play a role. I think the saddest meeting I may have ever had in my life was in Kosovo in 2004, I guess 2004, end of 2004. I was still with the government. And I asked the American, in those days, mission to, I had met with Kosovo Albanians, I had met with Kosovo Serbs in the north and the south, but I asked them to set up a meeting for me with non-Serb representatives of non-Serb minorities. And, you know, we're talking about Bosniaks and Turks and Roma and Ashkali, Gorani, you name it. I may have forgotten one or two. And with the exception of the Turks, who for maybe historical reasons and maybe because of numbers and maybe because they were already playing a role in coalition politics, with that exception, all the others, it was just the saddest meeting I've ever had. They were basically saying, you don't know what it's like to live in a society without the rule of law. And they were being brutalized. This was only, this was 2004. It was just a few months after March. They just read chapter and verse about, and that is an institutional question. I mean, the rule of law has to be observed, has to be created, and has to be observed. And then we can have social integration. But without that as a precondition. Now, I do think things have improved greatly since whatever it was, September 2004. But I don't think that you should minimize the role of the state and its laws in that. Shpend, do you want to disagree with that?
Yes, because rule of law is not only a minorities problem also.
So well, of course, I didn't mean to imply that.
In the sense that social integration and development, we see it for all the people in Kosovo, regardless of what your name is and what you do. So behaving like we need to create a special development fund for the North, for the Serbs, through the agreement, is saying that the rest of Kosovo is doing well and only the minority in the North is doing worse, so we need to create a development fund. You know that the average income of the Serbs in the north is 2.5 times bigger than the average income of the Albanian in the south. So instead of thinking of these partial Kosovo and thinking of minorities being in a difficult position, let's think of Kosovo as a normal state where citizens of Kosovo are in trouble. And let's try and develop Kosovo without negating the fact that I'm Albanian and someone is Serb, but not taking that as a starting position of what we do for someone. You know, when you say it's a multi-ethnic society, it starts from the things that divide us, where we are different. When we talk about education, health, and development, we start from the things that make us, unite us, and talk about some universal truths about us as humans. And that's the problem that I have all the time, focusing only on minorities. Not to say that they are in good conditions, on the contrary, but it's not any worse or any better than the Kosovo Albanians, except for the fact that I think that non-Serb minorities are in a more difficult and a much more difficult position than the Serb minority. But we need to think of situations on how to improve the situation for all.
That Serbia recognized Kosovo. With this, there is neither de jure nor de facto recognition. I think that Serbia is trying to make sure that there will be an Serbian entity, which will have its own autonomy, because municipalities are both territorial and administrative units and will get together in this. So we know very well that Milosevic recognized Bosnia outside Serbia only when Alija Izetbegovic recognized Serbia inside Bosnia in the form of Republika Srpska. So I think we have the same model. And I think it's overrated the fact that Belgrade now is changing its means. I don't think it's changing its policies. It's changing its means because circumstances are different. Goals and stances of Belgrade toward Albanians and Kosovo remain the same. They don't want to recognize independence. They don't apologize for the crimes of the past. For the 4 wars which they waged in former Yugoslavia in the 90s, 150,000 non-Serbs were killed. If one person killed 5, policeman, soldier, or paramilitary, this means that you have 30,000 serial murderers in Serbia walking free. And the number of those who are behind the bars is a 2-digit number. So I don't think that things changed much as we consider sometimes. Therefore, I think we're very far from recognition and independence. I think sometimes Serbia is using the tactic of, let's say, Israel in Oslo, 1993, where Israel recognized PLO as representative of Palestinian people, but did not recognize Palestinian state. Likewise, Serbia is recognizing government of Kosovo, but not state of Kosovo. So I think that there is a parallelism in this sense. And the point 14 says that Serbia is not going to block Kosovo in EU integration. But actually, this point is about Kosovo not blocking Serbia in the EU integration, because Kosovo is not going to integrate into EU in the next 10 or 15 years. It is Serbia which is trying to get integrated as soon as possible. So actually, again, it's about Serbia, it's not about Kosovo. And let's not forget that for the first time in history, we had dependency of Serbia from Kosovo, which was not used by our government.
Can I just...
Yeah, sure, Shpend.
If you listen, because there were 7 agreements, technical negotiations before the political dialogue. After every agreement, our Prime Minister went on TV and said Serbia has de facto recognized us. It means that Serbia in the last 2 years has recognized us 15 times. But the truth is that Serbia's official position towards Kosovo is we will not recognize and we will never recognize the state of Kosovo, which was accepted by the EU as, okay, you don't have to do it because we understand that you've lost quite a lot. That acceptance means that we will now again negotiate in the future about things. In 2007, when the Ahtisaari package was presented to us, it was told, make this concession. It's a difficult one, but it's the final one that you have to make in order to become an independent state. Vedvendosje opposed it on the ground that if you accept Serbia as a negotiator for the internal matters of Kosovo, it will come back again to us, and it did. We started the political dialogue, which at the beginning was promised as a dialogue that will lead to recognition, and then it was devalued to a seat in the UN, and then it said not even a seat at the UN, but normalizing relations. And I think that in a few years' time, we will sit again at the table for the seat at the UN and what it means to another concession and another concession. Once you recognize that this is something to be discussed about, now we will talk all kinds of things. And look at the topic of negotiations. It has gone from political arrangements to economic development to urban planning to mining, to energy, to telecommunications. That's it. That's everything that the state does. So it's reformatting, reinventing the Kosovo state, thinking that it might be normal, but it starts from abnormal conditions. What we always say is that we are being compared to Palestine, Afghanistan, and crisis and saying you're +2, you're doing better than them. We want to be compared to Slovenia, Belgium, and say you're -10 so that we think as a normal country.
But sometimes the informal comments are even more important, certainly to Joe Sixpack, as we say. Last week, President Nikolic was challenged on, why aren't you doing more in Kosovo and everything? And he said, well, unfortunately, I'm not president in Pristina. You know what that told people in Serbia? It told them, get over it, live with it. Of course he's saying we're never going to do it. He can say that forever. But when the president says, unfortunately, I'm not president, it means I don't have any power there. Second point, even stronger, I would say, there's no parallel with Republika Srpska. I mean, Dayton created two entities at about a 51-to-49 ratio. Republika Srpska's relation to the federation in population, in economic power, in potential or real military power is just so much greater than the 4 municipalities north of the Ibar vis-a-vis the rest of Kosovo. I'm sorry, I just don't see the parallel.
I would just note that in the penultimate point of the agreement, it says very clearly it is agreed that neither side will block or encourage others to block the other side's progress in their respective EU path. This means that Kosovo will become a member of the EU separately on its own bottom, without interference from Serbia. I know that that's going to be difficult, but the important part is that it's separately on its own bottom, and there is only one kind of entity admitted to the EU, and that's an independent and sovereign entity. That's why this is this close to actual recognition. I think it is clearly de facto recognition. It is this close to de jure recognition.
I think it's fair to say that Kosovo negotiators did give up on one important thing, and that is Serbia not blocking Kosovo's entry into the UN. I think that was one thing they would have liked to have gotten. The gentleman's waiting there with the glasses. Yes, sir. Right. Hold your seat.
It's very amorphous. I can tell you that I've minced no words with authorities in Kosovo about the question of election fraud, which I regard as terribly important. And if they hold another election with the kinds of problems they had last time, they can forget about a lot of international community support. So I don't think we're sacrificing democracy on the altar of short-term stability. And poor Ed Joseph spent a year there, more than a year there, trying to do quite the opposite.
We say in Kosovo that the parliament has 120 members. That's formally because it has 122 informally. The US embassy has a person who is in the halls all the time, and also the EU has them all the time. But I will say one thing, that when the last election happened, the EU called them, the elections in Kosovo were calm and quiet. As if that was they were good because nobody killed each other. But a French ambassador said it was industrial theft. But you didn't see that in the comments of the EU officials. And I say for one reason only, because they do not want to destabilize the country. If EU goes out immediately after elections in Kosovo and said these were fraudulent elections, there was theft, we don't recognize them, they know it's going to cause a lot of trouble and they don't want to do that. The same goes for EULEX. EULEX, when they won, and this was admitted by Soren Jessen-Petersen when he was SRSG, he said, every time we wanted to arrest a big shark, someone who is very important in politics, he said this on public television in Kosovo, he said, you cannot imagine who called me on the phone and said not to do it. And I say that this is a very, very important thing. I mean, he didn't give names, and I don't want him to give names, obviously, he didn't want to incriminate other people into this, but I think that this comes at the cost of democracy. It's very difficult to fight corruption in this situation in Kosovo because it's linked to the dialogue, inevitably. If you want to have moderate politicians, you turn a blind eye. I just want to say an informal quote by Dacic. He said, this is not the first time we lost Kosovo. We're going to get it back again. Just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, first of all, according to law of Kosovo, and we inherited this from UNMIK regulations, Serbs who are refugees in Serbia can come back wherever they want, not only where they used to live. However, there is one problem, is that the return has to be done, return to the property. Many of them sold their property, and some of them got their property during Milosevic's regime, or some of them during notorious Aleksandar Rankovic. So it's not a very simple situation. However, I think that the return of minorities should be in place. And not forgetting that Ron Redmond from UNHCR in the July of the year 1999 said that the majority of Serbs who left Kosovo left together with Serbian police and army. So we must take note in that as well. I think that the dialogue to, the alternative to this dialogue is conditioning Serbia like Germany did, because what we need is to change Serbia. The problem with Serbia is that there is not much of legacy from, let's say, liberals and social democrats, Miroslav Piroćanas or Dimitrije Tucovic. The entire political elite of Serbia is more or less from the legacy of Nikola Pasic. So then that's why we have problems in the Balkans. And this must change. At present, one could say that neither Kosovo nor Serbia are normal countries. They are both abnormal countries. And normalization of relations of two abnormal countries adds to abnormality. We need normalization of Kosovo, normalization of Serbia, and then to have normal relations. But Serbia has to face its past. And I think that is not possible with this political elite that we have in power there.
It depends on what kind of country do we want. And Vendoza stands for a parliamentary republic. Once you choose the president directly, the idea for it came from the fact that the parties could not agree in the parliament to choose one, so we need a president that is a president of all, so we would have a better president if people elected. But we failed to mention that no one in Kosovo can win unless supported by a political party. So I think we're still going to have presidential candidates that are party people. It's just that whoever to pass to the second round, they're going to get supported by political parties, and I don't think we're going to have a solution. We still favor the election of the president from the parliament because that forces the political subjects to agree to a consensual person who could not then be a party person but would be a representative of the all. And of course, we still maintain that the parliament should be the sovereign of the country, representing the people, obviously, since we are a republic.